One of the hardest achievements to get in the Master Chief Collection is completing Halo 2's LASO playlist. Now, of course, LASO stands for Legendary All Skulls On, which essentially means the hardest difficulty with all these little modifiers that would make the game even harder enabled. And while the LASO challenge is hard enough in every Halo game, Halo 2 is already so difficult on Legendary difficulty. When they were building the LASO playlist, they only included the skulls that were featured in the original Halo 2 game, minus the Envy skull. And while to this day, Halo 2 LASO is still the absolute hardest challenge in any Halo game, which, as many of you remember, about a year ago, we painstakingly went through and completed, we couldn't help but to wonder what Halo 2 LASO would be like if instead of the 24 skulls that are enabled in a regular LASO playthrough. And just a quick warning, there are a few flashing light moments coming up in the video, so I just want to give anyone who might need to know about that a heads up. All 33 skulls, including the new skulls introduced in Halo 2 Anniversary, were enabled. This isn't something that even has a playlist dedicated to it, but we were genuinely curious. Would having some of those extra skulls that may add a benefit in one way or another outweigh the hindrance of some additional skulls that make the game harder? I can safely say this. When we started jumping into this for the video, we thought it would be difficult, but we did think with the help of the Scarab skull, which was introduced in Halo 2A, we thought big picture wise it would be easier. And then when we actually started, we were shocked to find out how incredibly difficult the 33 skulls all active at the same time actually is. And fortunately for us, this video is sponsored by Vite Ramen. We couldn't be more excited because Vite Ramen is healthy, it's easy to store, and it only takes 3 minutes to prepare. Not only does it have the protein, nutrients, and fiber you need so that it's so easy to eat healthy, it's almost like cheating, but the quality and the flavor of the ramen noodles are honestly next level. It's like restaurant quality noodles that are still cheaper than ordering food on DoorDash or Uber Eats. Also, the guys over at Vite Ramen hooked us up with our own referral link, so if you guys buy ramen using our link down below, not only are you getting really tasty ramen, but you're also supporting Rocket Sloth directly, so we can make more content like this and the other content that we've been putting out. Also, when you order through our link, you get access to exclusive bundles that come with free chopsticks, a free hooked ramen spoon, and 2 high-quality vinyl stickers on top of your Vite Ramen noodles. And with code RocketSloth, you save an additional 10% at checkout. And the guys over at Vite Ramen are actually really big Halo fans. They're even Onyx rank in matchmaking. And we're not implying that Vite Ramen will make you better at Halo, but I mean, look, they're Onyx. Now getting back to LASO, you gotta remember, Halo 2 LASO in itself is already nearly impossible, with Legendary difficulty in Halo 2 already being the highest. Skulls like Black Eye make it where your shields only recharge when you melee enemies, and other skulls like the Mythic Skull, for example, give enemies increased health. Also, the Anger Skull makes it so enemies fire their weapons faster and more frequently. These are just examples of stereotypical Halo 2 LASO skulls. Now we add in some of these extra skulls and things get a lot more chaotic. For instance, we have the ability to use the Scarab gun, which of course could wreck an entire room very quickly, but when we tie that with the Boom Skull, which also has to be activated if we're gonna do a LASO run with all 33 skulls enabled, the explosion radius is much bigger, meaning that the splash damage from the Scarab gun is even more aggressive than whenever you just are typically playing around with it. Then also the Sputnik skull is already a skull enabled from a regular LASO, and if you pair that with the Feather skull, it means that objects that get hit by the Scarab gun now move even more rapidly and aggressively than before. So right away when we started this up, we realized the Scarab gun is definitely going to be one of the biggest hindrances in this LASO run, especially with the amount of times already through the few levels we started with that we were just getting crushed by objects on a very regular basis because of these types of physics-based skulls. Okay, then it gets even worse because Master Blaster makes it so that one player has overshield but can only melee, while the other player doesn't have shields at all but has infinite ammo. And then there's the Streaking Skull, which while active, players' shields will constantly decay but will be part partially refilled each time a player gets a kill, which because of the black eye skull is never, unless you melee an enemy, but even after you melee an enemy, your shields will start decaying again because of the streaking skull. So not only for the entire LASO run, we're gonna have to play through without having any shields, we also are gonna have to be very sensitive to the increased blast radius of the Scarab gun, and only one of us throughout the entire playthrough is able to shoot at a time, and as far as we could tell, it just randomly switches from one player to the other. So Cairo Station, right away, we realized that this would be an interesting and unique challenge unlike anything we've ever done before, because we were stuck in that opening room for an incredibly long time as whoever was the designated shooter would just blast the Scarab gun in there and hope to not die. Now, because of the other LASO skulls that are enabled, such as Thunderstorm and a lot of those other movement related skulls, every time you shoot the Scarab gun, it will launch an enemy pretty much 100% of the time. It will just launch them to the other side of the room, and the initial hit of the Scarab gun just launches them away from the blast radius, making it a lot harder actually to kill some of the shielded enemies like elites who now have upgraded ranks with them. So surprisingly enough, to actually kill enemies, you have to shoot the Scarab gun at the enemies for a long time and multiple times in a row if you actually want to kill off some of the enemies. And right here was our first example of what we're going to call a death hallway, which is what we're going to call an area that is very close quarters and there's objects that make it so we just randomly die at any given moment. Also, the grunt funeral skull is on, meaning much like Combat Evolved Anniversary, but not like Halo 2 LASO, the grunts will explode after dying, which adds this whole extra thing where sometimes they'll launch right towards you and explode in your face. So yeah, this opening room in Cairo Station wasn't too friendly. It took multiple tries to clear this door without something going wrong, especially because more waves of elites come pushing in up top, and once again, you have to keep direct fire on them, and while they're flying through the air getting bounced around because of Sputnik, Boom, and Feather, they have perfect accuracy, they never flinch, and they shoot frequently because of the Anger Skull. So after eventually clearing out this hallway, which just was this interesting process of trying to stay safe and just shooting a bunch, we did make our way up this staircase, and this is where we really realized we were running into a lot of problems with enemies we thought would obviously be dead after getting blasted by a Scarab not dying, because surprisingly enough, their health makes them in a position where they can survive quite a bit of shots from the Scarab before even losing their shields to begin with. So a lot of the times we would think we were safe and we would find out we weren't safe, or more frustrating, just in general, when you're shooting a Scarab in a close quarter setting like this, not only do you have to worry about objects flying across the room and splattering you, but if an object flies across the room in front of you and you accidentally shoot the object while you're shooting your Scarab beam, if it cross paths with your Scarab beam, all of a sudden the explosion of impact is now much closer to where you are, and without shields, you'll just instantly die. This happened so many times to us on Cairo Station, and it was pretty upsetting whenever it did happen, though this was a level that we were able to surprisingly chip our way through. And despite the fact that we have all these extra skulls enabled, this is one of the few levels that I can safely say out of Halo 2 Anniversary where it's a little bit easier than the regular LASO playthrough. Now, mind you, when we did Halo 2 LASO, Cairo Station took us a combined 17 hours of attempts before we were able to complete this level, so having the Scarab gun in this instance did still outweigh the cons of having all of these extra skulls. But just because we've done some of these levels already, I can safely say that isn't the case for the rest of the levels in Halo 2. Matter of fact, multiple levels are significantly harder because of the extra skulls and the Scarab skull, and we'll get into those very soon, don't worry. Now for the rest of Cairo Station, there's the 2 hangar rooms. Both of these were incredibly frustrating as well though, because of the Sputnik, Boom, Scarab, Feather combination. It's just a matter of every one of your shots launches the elites somewhere safe. You have to keep worrying about them just being in some random corner and shooting at you because, of course, with Halo 2 LASO, all enemies are invisible as well, and these are really wide open rooms with a lot of random cover that can be launched around, so you have to worry constantly about something either splattering you or getting in the line of your shot. So this room and the following room, which was a massive death hallway we were stuck on for probably an hour or so, are pretty aggressive as well in kind of beating the idea of death hallways into you, and you slowly start to get a feeling for how close and far away an object will be before the splash damage will completely wreck you. And remember, with the Iron Skull on, or just with Halo 2 on Legendary, one player dies, both players get reverted to the last checkpoint. It's not as simple as just waiting for yourself to respawn on your teammate. You're gonna have to chip away through this together. It would be really frustrating when we would be making progress as well, and then randomly, as you're clearing out the last couple of enemies, your gun shuts off because it now switches to your teammate, and then your teammate, who was maybe staying safe, hiding in cover, will push up to take over because of the Master Blaster switching who the shooter is, and they might not have the same awareness to look out for a specific enemy, and we end up reverting. This happened multiple times to both Luke and I when we're doing this together, where just in general, it just cut out at the worst possible time, and we end up having to revert, and the other player has to now clear the room all over again. Now, after getting out of the two hangars, we had to go down into this little underground area, and this ended up being an area where, since we were so cautious with the Scarab gun constantly splash damage killing us, we started really trying to utilize our grenades where we could, since we do have unlimited grenades as long as we're the designated shooter. So this downstairs hallway area became a grenade fest a bit until we kind of got tired for hoping it would kill the elites and started just shooting the Scarab gun in there. Eventually, we were able to clear a little bit of this and push up into the under area, though the elites that push in through the staircase when you get under the armory were kind of a bit of a threat. Fortunately, while Luke was the designated shooter here, I ended up using my sword to clear out one of the elites, which made it a little bit easier for Luke to clear the other side. And also, in the whole process of this, we had this discussion of what this room's purpose actually is. We're realizing it's probably like a way to transfer missiles or something from one side of the ship to the other, but this whole time we always thought it was some sort of train station for whatever reason. And it wouldn't make any sense if this was a train station, but for some reason it still kind of feels like a train station. I don't know, it was just a little side note that I felt was very necessary to bring up. Nonetheless, we pushed upstairs. This next area wasn't too bad because we're starting to get a little bit of a better feel for what we can and can't do with the Scarab gun. And when I say not too bad, I mean we were maybe only stuck here for 45 minutes to an hour rather than multiple hours at a time, or how long we were stuck in this section in our original Halo 2 LASO run. But things did smoothen out a little bit by the time we pushed out of this area. We jumped up top and jumped across to go into the area where you group up with Sergeant Johnson and Keys. This hallway can be a little bit of a pain, but you can clear it out carefully enough. And then we made our way outside and we did the little space part, which surprisingly enough wasn't as bad once you're in the open expanse of space, because a lot of the times, even if you don't kill the elites, you can knock them so far away they're not really a problem anymore. Then we pushed up. The bugger section, which was pretty hard on Halo 2 LASO, was incredibly easy just because one well-timed Scarab shot can kill all of the buggers at once, and then you can kind of just shoot down at all the enemies, clearing this section pretty fast. And the next outdoor section wasn't too bad either. It wasn't until we got to the final area where you have to defuse the bomb, where you kind of have to come up with a few different strategies to how to approach the room. We were thinking about whether or not we wanted to camp in the elevator or have one person bait the enemies out, but while we were talking about what our plans were, I kind of just jumped forward and started trying to shoot at some of the enemies and wipe the room as fast as possible, and after a few attempts it actually ended up working. So Cairo Station ended up being cleared in a much faster time of just a couple of hours compared to the 17 hours it took us on Halo 2 Anniversary. Now, Outskirts was a very interesting level nonetheless, because first of all, you can jump up on the rooftops and avoid a lot of the fights, which does make this part a bit easier. Matter of fact, I was able to run all the way into Hotel Zanzibar, avoiding most combat through the first section of this level, and it wasn't until we got to the beach area where things got a little bit more difficult, just because there's a lot of enemies that are kind of close quarters on the exit of the hotel. There's also a phantom that flies in and shoots at you, and typically in this level you might grab a ghost or maybe even a warthog and start driving ahead. And Ghosts and Warthogs are great because they still are applied to the Scarab gun. But a problem we run into with a literal all skulls on run as opposed to a regular LASO run is the jacked skull is now enabled, meaning you can only enter a ground vehicle if you hijack it from an enemy. So this means that throughout the rest of this play, we won't be able to use a Warthog unless we manage to hijack it from a flood infected form on Quarantine Zone, and any other ground vehicle will have to be hijacked in the process. So when I became the designated shooter, it kind of just became a game of I was going to just walk and try to clear out the areas as much as I could that were on the beach. And for the most part, it wasn't all that bad. We were able to clear out the first section. And the second section gets a little bit chaotic when a ghost rolls up and tries to splatter you. And once again, if an enemy is too close to you, you're kind of limited on what you can do because the splash damage can end up killing you. So it was a little bit chaotic just pushing our way around the beaches and making sure all the enemies died. But when we finally did make our way into the tunnel, it did seem to get a little bit easier because we had such long sight lines to be able to shoot the enemies from that we didn't have to worry as much about objects flying up and getting in our way and killing us in the process. So we were able to painstakingly take out a lot of the enemies and other vehicles that would come at us. Unfortunately, enemy vehicles like a ghost that would drive up to you get launched really easily with the Scarab, Sputnik, Boom, Feather combination that's going on here. The worst part of this level definitely was just the long walk because this is definitely intended for you to play with a vehicle. So we had to walk for quite a while and take out various vehicles along the way. We had a couple close calls when we got to meet up with those shadows that are carrying the other vehicles, but we were able to get past those as well. And the last area wasn't all that bad. We did die a couple of times, but we didn't have to worry about getting instantly spawn killed by a ghost like we did on our Halo 2 LASO, so we were happy at least with that, and we're able to clear out this big area before making a run to the end section of this level. Now, all in all, with the new skulls added in and not being able to use a vehicle here, I would say this level is probably on par with what Outskirts is on regular Halo 2 LASO, as Outskirts in general isn't that hard of a level LASO, but still has a little bit of challenges along the way, and so did this one when we had the LASO setup going on here, or the literal legendary all skulls on here. But then we were going on to Metropolis, and Metropolis is where I can definitively say that this level alone is a perfect example of why LASO can be harder than a regular LASO level in some instances. Because while Metropolis was a relatively challenging level for a regular LASO in itself, the LASO version of this is 10 times harder, borderline impossible. Literally thought that this was maybe the individual and only reason why there wasn't a playlist out there for completing it with legendary literally all skulls on. Because this level is just so brutally unfair at the beginning of the level, you question whether or not this is even possible for any player to do. Essentially, it's mostly because of some of the extra skulls that are now enabled. Besides the fact that Jacked is enabled, meaning we can't use the Warthog or the Scorpion tank at the beginning of the level, meaning that we're going to be running on foot here, taking out some of the ground vehicles like the Ghost and the Wraith isn't too bad with the Scarab gun. But when you get halfway up the bridge, 4 Banshees spawn in and they begin to attack you while you're on the ground, and we made this realization that at the very least, on Metropolis, these Banshees are invincible. You cannot actually kill the Banshees. Or if you can, it's incredibly difficult. In Halo 2, vehicle health is tied to the pilot of whatever vehicle is being driven. So in this case, these 4 Banshees are all being driven by elites, and because of the Thunderstorm Skull, they're higher level elites. Then they also have the Mythic Skull, making them have extra health. But remember how in Cairo Station I was talking about the Boom, Sputnik, Feather combo flinging elites? It's 10 times worse when you end up flinging a Banshee further away from you, because not only are the Banshees fast at flying back to continue to attack you, but the second you fling a Banshee with a Scarab shot, the pilot is only injured or damaged a little bit, and with these pilots having shields, they end up recharging and fly back to continue to attack you. So the only way you can actually, in theory, kill these banshees would be to continuously land multiple shots on the banshees, but with how far away they get flung, even if you continue to shoot at the banshee, the time it takes for the scarab shot to reach the banshee itself is more than enough time for the banshee to fly out of the way of the shot. Seriously, we spent hours just trying to pick off the banshees from the sky. It's not something possible, and they fly back so quickly and kill you that even if you fling one away and quickly try to shoot at another one, the third or the fourth one will be right up by you while the first and second one are already on their way back. This makes just trying to even make a run for it in the second half of the bridge impossible. There's literally nothing you can do here. So we were stuck in this section for an incredibly long time, trying different methods of, first of all, picking off the banshees, because we didn't realize at the time that we couldn't kill these banshees no matter how hard we tried. We thought there would be a way to take them out, and it wasn't until hours in we really were realizing that no matter what we did, we couldn't kill these banshees. So the alternate option here would be to try to hijack a banshee, which actually ended up working one time, surprisingly enough, with where we got a checkpoint where I was able to bait a banshee into attacking our marine leady, and in the process I would then hijack a banshee. So this was a big breakthrough, as we thought, finally we can get out of this area and I can just boost straight to the tunnel and just try to get away from the banshees and teleport Luke to me later. Now the problem is there's an invisible barrier, so you don't do this specifically, that starts right after you get off of the bridge. So any banshee you hijack can't actually bypass this invisible barrier, so even if I used it to boost a couple of feet forward and then make a run for it, I still was getting shot down by the other banshees. So my next option was to try to use the banshee, as even though Luke was the designated shooter at the time that I got the banshee, if you're in a vehicle you also can still shoot scarab guns out of it, so we were finally both able to shoot at the same time, which was great, except the scarab animation of firing out of the banshee is so large, half the time you can't even see what you're shooting at. Then also the eye patch skull makes it so that your aim assist is disabled, so I'm not getting any extra help along the way, and the blind skull's on, so we don't have any reticle. And also we run into the same problem. Even when I hit a banshee with the scarab gun, it will just push them back a bit and they can recharge. And it only takes 1 or 2 shots from a banshee before you end up dying, because through this whole process we still don't have any shields because of the other skulls that we talked about at the beginning of this video. So no matter what we tried doing, even with the banshee, we weren't getting any luck here either. And after multiple hours of trying, we decided to call it quits and try to come back to it on another day. When we did come back to it, we had one more strategy we hadn't quite tried yet, and this one may have been the key to our success, or at the very least an option that could maybe give us a chance of getting across this bridge. And that of course was the fact that we hadn't tried hijacking any ghosts yet. We know that the ghosts aren't susceptible to the same invisible barrier that the banshees are, so maybe if we could hijack a ghost, we could try to speed past the banshees, and with some good shots and quick maneuverability, we could bypass the banshees, but it wasn't going to be too easy. Now, in itself, going across the bridge and trying to even get a ghost to begin with was pretty hard, because this time around we couldn't just yeet the ghosts from far away. We had to let them get close, and once again, 1 or 2 shots instantly kills us. They try to splatter us. They're very aggressive, and a lot of the times, even if you do get the hijack, the elite will just quickly 180 shoot you with his plasma rifle, and you're back to the last checkpoint. Though with enough trial and error, we did eventually get our hands on a ghost, and it kind of was perfect how it worked out, because I got in a ghost and Luke was the designated shooter, so he could shoot at some of the other vehicles up ahead while I was just trying to keep the ghost safe, or keep myself safe and alive, and stay further back so I'm not a bigger target. Then when we pushed our way up halfway across the bridge to where the banshees spawn in, it became this mix of Luke trying to shoot a couple of them to yeet them out of the way, while I tried to boost forward ahead before the 2 other banshees that come out of the 4 kind of circle around where the ghost is at that point. Now, multiple times I did get very close where I could get into the tunnel and a banshee would follow me in the tunnel, because the barrier doesn't apply to past them and shoot me down, but eventually I kind of memorized a route where if I quickly cut and turned over onto the upper sidewalk, I could boost my way into the tunnel and get away from those banshees, finally bypassing this section, though Luke was still out there and he had to find a safe spot away from the banshees, and I would have to clear this whole next area by myself. And mind you, at this time, Luke was still the designated shooter, so I didn't have a gun outside of my Ghost. So while it would be a lot easier to jump out, take it slow, use my BR Scarab gun, and kill some of the enemies in the tunnel, instead I had to stay glued to my Ghost. I had to make sure I didn't flip, because then I would be without a weapon, as Luke was set up as the shooter and I couldn't use my gun at this time.
So while going over this, I realized Elijah actually skipped to the part where it teleported me. If you're curious what happened, Elijah just killed everyone inside. It took like 20 tries maybe, and he cleared it. He eventually became the shooter after dying a couple times, and then he was just able to clear, and then he teleported me, and that's where we're gonna pick up.
So moving forward, the next part of Metropolis was a little bit interesting. After I made my way through the tunnels, Luke was able to respawn on me, and honestly, the rest of this level just became infinitely better once we finally got across the bridge. Still though, that bridge was so awful. So we decided to begin moving up. Clearing out all the jackal snipers wasn't actually all that scary compared to the regular lasso, because we could just shoot our Scarab gun at the enemies and just wipe them all away pretty quickly. And from there, it was more just a quick flick of trying to take out the vehicles in the next area as fast as possible to make sure we didn't get immediately murdered. So it wasn't too bad getting past this section. When we got more down the area to where the streets were, our main strategy here was to stay as far back as possible and take out the vehicles with the Scarab gun, which is surprisingly, not that surprisingly, super effective against ground vehicles, so it wasn't too bad. Nothing like banshees flying over constantly trying to kill us. We still had to make sure we were staying far enough back to make sure we didn't get shot at randomly and die in the process, and there are some jackal snipers that are a little bit scary, so we had to take those out too. So after that, we pushed our way into the building, and we got to the Scarab part, which surprisingly had its own difficulty within it that is different than what you expect from a regular lasso, as since it's such close quarters, you're very limited to how to engage this area. Now, interestingly enough, if you don't jump on the Scarab right away, multiple waves of enemies will spawn in, and obviously that means there's more targets to take out, making this part harder. And if you jump on the Scarab right away, well, you're kind of limited to what you can actually shoot at, because you're so close to the explosion and blast radius of the Scarab gun. So after a ton of trial and error, us trying different methods of trying to sneak on, trying to glitch through walls to see what we could see like we did on our regular lasso, this was definitely one that was a lot more tricky than maybe we had initially expected. But the strategy that ended up working best for us was to wait all the way to the very end when the Scarab made its way to the end of its course, and then take out all of the enemies on the top. We definitely were stuck with the Scarab section for quite some time. Lots of the time we would clear out the enemies on top, and it would be when we pushed down, we would just die in a very unfun way. Those elites like to push up real close and personal, and there's not a whole lot you can do. We had this one instance where I managed to clear out all of the enemies, quickly pulled out a sword to fight an elite that was coming up close to me, and we managed to kill each other. So while the end of the level was reached and it started playing the finale cutscene, the level reverted itself back to the final checkpoint, and we had to continue attempting from here. It was a bit of a pain. Even with unlimited grenades like you have in this, it didn't really benefit too much, and the best bet was to try to just kind of tactically shoot a Scarab shot down there and hope for the best when you're inside of the Scarab. But eventually we were able to clear this, and we moved on to Arbiter. Okay, so now we're switching off to the Arbiter, which is really interesting. Now, typically we utilized a speedrunning strategy when doing this even on Lasso to bypass the first set of rooms. So essentially you start up, you kill the elites right away so the door opens quicker, and there's less attention drawn when you are invisible running through this first room, and you get to skip this whole firefight. Now, what oddly enough kept happening though, maybe it's because of the skulls that make the enemies more aware of what's going on. Every time we popped our invisibility, we had such a short amount of time of invisibility that we would get noticed almost immediately upon running into this room, and we would get chased down and killed. We tried this multiple times, and we could not even get past this first section without some trouble. So this was one of those hallways that was just really a pain. We did eventually have a run where we made our way all the way to the elevator and made our way downstairs, and while we didn't have a full plan of how we were going to take on this next room, we had assumed by that point, getting all the way to the elevator, that we would have gotten a checkpoint along the way, and when we died right when we got off the elevator, we learned we hadn't gotten a checkpoint at all. Not even part of the way through. We were all the way back at the beginning of the level. And as it turned out, this was a problem we kept running into on this level, where just checkpoints, for whatever reason, would not work at all. So we ended up having to backpedal a little bit and not try our speedrunning strategy, because for whatever reason, we learned that if we kill those elites at the beginning and the 33 skulls are all enabled, we don't get any checkpoints. We don't know why this is the case, but that ended up happening for whatever reason. This doesn't happen in regular LASO, but with LASO, here we are with this weird nuanced thing. So now we had to reapproach this whole hallway section a completely different way, where we would have to now clear out this entire room because the rest of the Covenant that's with you kind of alert the enemies, and you have to kind of rely on them here to go in as some cannon fodder, and then you have to shoot your way out. Now, to make matters even harder, this is one of those death hallways where stuff is constantly being thrown in front of you, whether it's an enemy's weapon cutting in line of your Scarab beam, which gives you the splash damage death, or your own friendly grunts dying and getting launched into the room you're in and then exploding close to you, killing you. There was a lot of deaths in this area, and it was really, really tedious to fight our way through. Now, we did eventually start to get into a pattern of quickly trying to pop a couple of shots, then letting the room settle out, and then pop some more shots into the room, which kind of worked a little bit better. And then randomly, right as we were making progress finally, the level just crashed on us. And that definitely was very, very disheartening. Just that after all of that, the level just crashed and we were finally making progress and we'd had to start all over once again. So already we were running into way more problems with Arbiter than what we had ran into in our regular LASO run, meaning that so far I would argue that both Metropolis, the last level, and this level Arbiter are actually both harder in LASO than their counterparts in the regular LASO, just because there's more variables involved, like checkpoints not working or crazy banshees, or in this case the level just randomly crashing this way through. And mind you, that wasn't the only time we ran into this level crashing. We continued to try this level again, and we pushed our way all the way through this opening area, did the whole thing again, rode the elevator down. We were in the big room that you have to open the gate for. This room wasn't too bad. We kind of remembered where all of the enemies come from our regular LASO run, so we're able to pop our Scarab gun shots in the right way. We only had to restart a few times here, but at least our checkpoints were working. Then we pushed our way down this hallway, which these tight corridors are absolutely insanely hard. These elites are relentless, and they don't die easily because of all of those skulls that are on. So you have to be really careful not to kill yourself in the process. But even after pushing our way down this ramp and into this next room, this room in itself is really challenging, and I'd come up with a strategy where I eventually played very aggressively to try to quickly kill the enemies that push in at once, and I started to memorize that there's almost these semi-scripts on the different sets of enemies in this room individually set up. As you slowly push through the room, the enemies will pop out, so you have to be aware of that and predict that, and when you reach the end of the room, this door will open and grunts will run in. And when the door opened, I killed the grunts, and things are going well, and the level crashed again. So we were already up to 2 crashes on this. It might be something with LASO causing just extra overload in this, but it is so hard when you're hours into a level run and it crashes, and it's not like you have a checkpoint where you're just stuck in one place. You literally get pushed all the way back to the beginning of the level and we have to start all over again. This isn't even a scenario where we can do things like soft checkpoints because there aren't any opportunities to do something like that in Halo 2. So we would have to start this level over once again, pushing our way through that opening room again, pushing our way down the elevator, down the ramps again, fighting those elites, getting stuck on the elites in that little ramp area all over again just to get to this room one more time. Fortunately enough, this time the level didn't crash and we were able to clear the next set of ramps slowly. This room where you kind of wrap around the building and there's a bunch of enemies was a little bit tricky, but it wasn't overly impossible, just a little bit frustrating at times. But finally, after pushing into the next area and making our way to the Banshee section, it was just a straight flight to the end of the level. We tried to avoid as much as possible and avoid any other Banshees or any other flying vehicles because we just don't want to deal with that type of nightmare, and we were able to complete this level. But then, while we were already struggling with the Arbiter having crashing issues, we were a little bit nervous about Oracle because in our regular LASO run, we know that this level is pretty unstable. There's a cutscene midway through that can cause the game to completely crash if you're in co-op. Fortunately, there was a work around that, so we were cautiously going into this level. Now, right away, there's a ton going on. There are the Flood that chases you down, and whoever has the active Scarab gun actually has less shields at this point in the level than the player who can't shoot, and they can practically be insta-killed by these little floodlings running around. So it is a little chaotic, and we did die quite a few times just trying to survive these little guys, and punching them is a bit harder, especially because there is no aim assist with the eye patch skull enabled. So we continue to push our way through here, and it was a little bit okay. When we finally got to the elevator, things were good. We were doing okay at clearing the elevator section out, making sure things were moving along, but we did end up dying at one point, and we didn't get a checkpoint, so we ended up having to revert back to the beginning of the level, and that was already frustrating, having to do that opening room again. As it turned out, we had to make sure we waited for this elite to say his line, or else we don't get a checkpoint before we go into the room with the big elevator. So this time around, we learned that, we made sure we did this, and then we went into the big room. Okay, so the elevator part definitely isn't fun. It's not an easy section at all. However, the one thing that we started to get really good at were callouts on where the Flood was spawning from, because that would let us preemptively shoot the Flood before they landed on the elevator, meaning that the chance of us getting killed by the blast radius being too close was significantly lower. So communication here was really key. So we kind of kept up with each other, making sure whoever was the shooter at the time was shooting in the right direction. It can get really confusing because this room rotates around as you continue to descend deeper into the structure. And as we were getting close to the bottom, we were feeling like we were actually going to be able to make it through this. And then the level crashed. And it was definitely really frustrating because we were almost past this dumb elevator section. So once again, we were back to the beginning of the level. We had to run through all of this again, go on the elevator ride, do the callouts again, try to survive, try not to die to some of the things that we had died to before. We died a few times, continue to progress, and right again at the same section the game crashed at, it ended up crashing a second time at the same exact spot, which is so unbelievably frustrating. So we loaded it up again, went another run through, tried killing all of the enemies, pushing through, rode the elevator down, and it crashed a third time in the exact same spot that the other two times we had played it on had also crashed. Meaning that unless we can come up with some sort of solution and really dig into the game here to figure out what exactly it is that is causing this specific level to crash, whether it's a co-op related issue, or maybe it's related to us shooting the Scarab gun at the wrong time, or something weird is going on right when we hit this point that's causing us to lose all of our progress and have to go back to the beginning, we really aren't going to be able to progress any further in this challenge. Now, we already started trying to figure out what is causing this stuff to happen. Right now, we don't fully understand why this level is falling apart and crashing when we are playing through this. It could be an Xbox related issue because we are both playing on Xbox Series X's, so perhaps we might need to dig in and try it on the PC to see if the crash still happens there. It could be a co-op related crash. And then one theory that I think might be one of the leading things is it could have something to do with the overall BSP, or the map that's loaded in on this level. Because similarly, the only other time we've crashed in Halo 2 in a somewhat repetitive way or repeatable way was on the Arbiter, the level right before it, and on this level, which share the same BSP, or I'm not exactly sure how the level designs and the files work out, but I believe the geometry and the levels themselves are shared in some way or another, and maybe there's something in the game that's not working properly that's maybe being pushed to its limit when we're shooting things like the Scarab gun, or all this other stuff is going on, and for whatever reason it crashes at this exact point where maybe there's a loading zone loading the second half of the level. We're really gonna have to dive in and try to explore this, but but for now, it's looking like this won't be completable unless we can really figure out what's going on here. So this might be a great opportunity now to turn this all around to you guys, because a lot of you guys have reached out wanting to see if there's anything you guys can do to help us or jump in a challenge with us. And here's a situation where we could probably use some help. We have this investigation on the Oracle we need to resolve, and we need to figure out why the game is crashing here. So if any of you guys want to try to play it solo, see if it crashes for you, or jump in with a friend, see if you can recreate the crash and then figure out what's actually causing it, would be greatly appreciated. We're going to be doing our own investigations on our own time, but if you want to jump in our Discord server, we'll set up a special chat right there so you guys can communicate and see if we can get down to the bottom of this and see if we can even get past the Oracle moving forward. We've already started to theory test a couple of the other levels, and we have had some success and some interesting things happen on our LASO playthroughs of those other levels, and we'll get to that once we know for certain what's going on with the Oracle. So stay tuned. We're going to be getting back to this very soon, and I really hope we can find a solution this time around, because it just would be so frustrating that a level is impossible, not because of the gameplay side of things, but just because of the functionality of things. It just would be kind of annoying. But anyways, if you've enjoyed this video and you enjoy us looking into this, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on for more videos like this. That's it for today though. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.